Welcome to this week's piece. So I picked up this guy for free. I was kind of excited about it because it had so many drawers, and I've been on the lookout for a dresser for myself that's kind of large enough and small enough at the same time. This fit the bill, but it certainly was not fancy enough for my style. So again, I had no idea what I was going to be doing with this. I just knew that I need to get the finish off the top. This was a really good candidate for scraping. My card scraper needs to be sharpened, so I just used the regular carbide scraper and then went through with my sander and got the top all cleaned up. And then I took off the hardware so that I could prepare for cleaning. Obviously, we are not keeping wooden knobs. So I'm using my Chalk Mountain cleaner just to get any surface dirt and dust off before I go through and give this thing a scuff sand, and then of course I will wipe back all of the sanding dust from that as well. And then, because like I said, I needed this to be fancier, I went through all of my molds and we're just going to deck this thing out. So I did run into a little trouble here because the main mold that I wanted to use is very, very intricate, and my favorite molding medium is clay because you can put it in and then immediately take it out and it does the shape of the piece, and it absorbs paint really well, and it's my favorite product to use for creating molds. However, upon starting this project, I put the clay in my favorite mold that I wanted to use for this, and it was just too detailed, and the clay was sticking into it because there were too many thin parts. Even with dusting it ahead of time, it wasn't working out well. So I decided to use Fast Cast, which is just a resin. It's a two-part. You just mix equal parts of both and pour it in, wait till it sets up, which is just, it's all right. It makes a really hard product, which is great. The downside to this is you then have to wait for it to set up before you can demold it. And then you have to make another batch, pour another batch, wait for it to harden, pull it out, and then, so I feel like it's a long process. Again, it creates a quality product, but it takes a lot longer than clay does. So this is a lot stronger than clay, which is a bonus to this, but again, clay is much faster. And because this is so slick when you're finished, it's essentially like plastic, you do have to prime over the top of it because you can paint over it and it will set up, but then as soon as I go back in to blend, because I do so many brush strokes over the top of it, it reactivates the paint and wants to pull it back off. So now that means I have to prime this piece, whereas had I used clay, I wouldn't have needed to prime this piece. Anyways, I know that was a lot, but this took a long time. So don't do this unless you have lots and lots of time on your hands and you don't get bored easily. So as you can see, I'm kind of fitting out some of these pieces to fit some of the drawers. They were just a little too skinny for certain parts of these, so I would cut off part of the molds while they're still flexible. Right when you take them out, they're still kind of bendy, and you can kind of cut them with scissors or bend them around curves if you have any curves. This piece was completely flat, so I didn't have to worry about any of that, but this stuff is really cool. It just, like I said, when you're doing what I'm doing here, which is putting on a billion of these, you might age a few years in doing so. I actually did this in stages, so I did some of the shop and then I would go home, and when it was time to make dinner, I would throw a few in the molds while I was doing that. So I had a bag of them and just kind of did as many as I thought I would need, and then I laid them out to figure out how many I had and what I was doing, and then I got the design that I liked. And then once I had the design laid out, then I could go through with my glue. You can use wood glue, you can use E6000. I'm using Titebond Quick and Thick for this one. It doesn't really matter, I have the piece laid down on its back, so I didn't have to worry about sliding or taping or any of that kind of stuff. You do have to worry about the glue bleeding up from underneath, so I have just a wet cloth here. This is a baby wipe. I'll wipe back any extra, and then if I see anything in any of the smaller crevices, I've got a little detail brush that'll go through and wipe back the glue here. Because the glue dries really, really hard, it's hard to get off any extra the next day once the glue is dried. So you don't want any drips or anything kind of coming out anywhere that you don't want, because you will be able to see it even though we're going to paint over the top of it. So just be patient, and once you apply them all and get them all down and you've gone through, just go ahead and give it a double check to make sure that you don't have any globs out anywhere that you missed. As I mentioned before, I'm going to have to prime this piece now because I'm using the resin, so I'm using my 123 primer in gray, which is my favorite primer. It's the one that I always use. And I'm just going to go over the entire body of this piece. So I use the roller for most of the flat surfaces, and then I always have a chip brush that I can kind of just take, dip in, and swirl around in all of the appliques, because obviously the roller won't get down in there, and you have to use the brush to do that. Again, with this, you want to make sure on these that you don't have any drips or anything that you will see later if you're doing this upright. Like I said, I have this on its back specifically for this so that I don't have to worry about drips or anything coming out anywhere that I don't want. I let the primer set up just a bit so that it's just tacky at this point and won't leave drips anywhere. And then I can lift the dresser up and I'm not worried about anything kind of causing drips in any of the appliques. Like I said, you'll get a little pooling areas in those, so you have to pay attention to those. That's why I let the primer set up just a bit. And then I can go around my drawer edges and clean up any extra primer that perhaps got around in there. And then the drawers, the inner parts of the drawers I'll deal with later. I'm not worried about that at all. I just wanted to show you this real quick because I was a little sad when I first found this because it wasn't dovetailed, and I was like, oh, it's just a regular, but no, this is still a really, really good joint. So if you see this kind, it's still a safe piece to pick up if you're concerned about the joinery. So my base coat for this is going to be light gray, and then I'm going to give myself a canvas of mellow white. So the light gray is very similar to my primer, which is awesome. And it's going to tone down all of the colors later on. And because I'm not really sure where I'm going with this piece. I have the painting picked out that I wanted to do. And then from that painting, after I get it finished, I'll kind of figure out then where I'm headed. But I feel like the gray is a safe color to use so that I can kind of go any direction with it and still feel good about that, if that makes any sense. So throwing the white on, I want obviously that to go in first. I will blend it into the gray. I'll do a slower blend in the next video, part 2 of this, so that you can see how to fully blend some other stuff. But for this video in particular, we're not going to spend a lot of time on blending because I'm just blending around the edges here super easily. It's 2 colors. It's a very easy blend because it's white into light gray. Not a huge jump there. It's just my white brush goes on, the gray goes on next to it, and then you can use a blank brush for this. You don't have to because they're so similar to each other if you're not worried about muddying up your own brushes, but it's just going back and forth between the colors and figuring out how much of a blend that you want. If you want it to be a short blend or a long blend. This, I was pretty happy with a short blend because I want the center part, like I said, to be the painting, so I wasn't terribly worried about it. And to jazz up the sides, since I knew I wasn't going to want to apply that many appliques all over the entire piece, I don't have time for that. I'm taking my Anaglypta wallpaper and I'm just going to fit this in. So they do have appliques along the very bottom to make it a little more cohesive, and then this wallpaper is also going to add texture and kind of fanciness to the inner portions here so that it feels like it's the same piece. So you're not looking at the sides and being like, oh, that's not even part of the same dresser. This will kind of help marry them together, and then also obviously the paint job will do the same. So to apply this, I just use my satin poly like I always do for any decoupaging and brush it on and then smooth it down. I don't apply the poly over the top of this specific paper though. And then of course I'm just going to take the light gray and do a quick coat over the entire piece so that I have the same base coat all over the entire dresser. For the top of this, and then also for the trim around the edge, I decided I wanted to do a gray wash. So it'll give the light wood effect, but still kind of be a little matchy-matchy with the dresser, which I thought would be just a fun thing instead of having it so stark. Initially, I was going to go like a dark brown, but I'm like, oh, you know what? Let's let it be light and airy. So far, I just kind of let the piece speak to me and tell me what to do, because you guys know I'm usually flying by the seat of my pants when I'm creating something. So for this front trim area, I just used a wet cloth and wiped back the paint that was already on there, and that works for the wash. And then for the top, I just got it wet with water, and then I took the paint straight out of the container and threw it on with a brush, and then I can spray it a little bit more to smooth it out. You just want this a really, really watery, liquidy consistency, and then wipe it back. Super, super easy. You can see here I'm going around and checking my drawers again to make sure that I'm not essentially gluing them closed with paint. And this will also kind of paint the edges as well as I go. Even though I'm just using my finger, it's such a teeny tiny little lip that it does a good job. So this is now the next day. My wash has sat overnight, and since it is a wash and not a stain or anything, it does raise the grain of your wood. So I'm taking a very light sandpaper and I'm just going over this and smoothing out the grain because it feels just a little rough. And then of course taking the tack cloth and cleaning up any of the extra dust. And then I'm doing an additional wash just to kind of amp it up a little. Again, this is the same process, getting it wet, brushing on the paint, and then wiping it back. I will not have to sand after this next one because the grain has already been raised and we've already taken care of it. Once that's done, we can get into the fun stuff, which has just been super exciting for me to try out another one of these. So my paint has been sitting, it is dried overnight. I will only do this over a paint that has been dried overnight. And then I'll add another base layer of white because Bob Ross works with a wet on wet method, which conveniently, so do we when we blend paint. So it's kind of the same thing. We are just blending paint. What's great about this is a hard blend, the yellow, light yellow into a deep purple, but the way that he does the paintings, the trees and bushes and everything kind of cover up parts of the blend that don't work out well. So it's kind of meant to be messy and not perfect, but it always turns out good. So I'm obviously not a professional painter in this regard. I have like no idea what I'm doing. This is only my second one. And I'm always surprised at how it turns out. So if you guys want to try this, seriously, just try it. The worst that can happen is you hate it and you just paint over it. But it's so fun to play with these things and figure it out, because as I was doing this, like especially at this point, I was like, this is terrible. This is nothing like the mountain picture. I felt like the mountain picture was quite a bit easier than this one. I felt like it came together a lot faster, and this one took me a while to look at it and be like, oh, okay, now it's starting to look like something. So that was a struggle for me as I was going. which is funny because I always tell you guys, just keep moving forward because it looks terrible until it doesn't. Like, you just have to keep going, and I was really struggling with that in this case. But I finally started to see it coming together, which was really fun. I did notice that my brushes weren't doing exactly what his were doing, and then because I don't use the same kind of paint he uses, my paint dries and his doesn't dry, and there's just a lot of issues. So there's a lot of things that I'm learning as I'm going, which is fun because I think I can apply it to the next time I want to do something like this. You do have to keep getting it wet, but not too wet because you can't have drips, because again, you can't blend out a drip when you're actually creating individual things. So it's interesting learning all this stuff, learning what different brushes do for this kind of paint. I struggled with doing the tree limbs because they would mix with all the other colors of paint. It was just, it was just kind of fun figuring it out and trying to decipher what I should do to fix a problem that I was having, because obviously they aren't the same problems that Bob would have in his paintings because he's using a different medium. But yeah, I did love how this ended up turning out. I'm really, really pleased with it. I'm always shocked. I don't always, I've done too, but you know what I mean. It's very cool. Very, very cool. And then I just did my best to blend around the edges of this so that it wasn't just a splotch on the front of the dresser. And then once we go into our next video, oh man, you guys, it's looking so cool. I can't wait for you to see the whole finished piece come together because I feel like it's going to be awesome.
Oh hi, Taryn here with Elegant Upgrades, and we don't have a finished piece, but we have a first process done. So this is my second attempt at painting on the front of a dresser. You guys saw the other one, which was the Shades of Grey mountain scene. This is the Splendor of Autumn, I believe it is, or a version of that. It's so fun. I can't, every time I'm so surprised, and I can't believe it. Anyways, this dresser I was doing for myself, so we'll see. What I always do when I do a dresser for myself is I list it incredibly high, and if it sells, cool, I made a lot of money, then I'm not that sad about it. But I'm gonna list this one really, really high because I think I want to keep it because it has so many drawers and all the things, and I sold my last dresser that I was using, so I struggle with keeping, like I'll use them for a while and then I list them because I'm like, oh, I made a new one and I like this one better. Do you guys do that? No, I'm the only one? Cool. Anyways, so what we've done here is just done the scene on the lower part of the dresser. I'll show you guys, a further out picture of it so that you can see the whole dresser. And then for next week's video, or I should say the next part of this one, this will just be a two-parter because you guys have really liked me kind of breaking them up so that I can go slower and show you all the things. So the next one will be the full process of the rest of it, so all of the finish over the entirety of the dresser to get it to kind of match with this without match, you know what I mean, to where it looks cohesive and not just a weird dresser with a painting in the lower half of it, if that makes any sense. Because I still have no idea what I'm going to do around the rest of it. I'm just going to use a lot of the colors that are in this and kind of blend them in together and see what I like, and hopefully it comes out again like something that I want to keep, because I really want to keep it. It's just so fun. And that'll probably only last a few months, but that's fine. I'm fine with having a dresser for a few months. Anyways, I've got really cool hardware to put on this because the hardware it came with was just dirty old wooden knobs. You guys saw how plain this thing was to begin with. Not great, but I think it's gonna be grand once it's all finished. Yeah. So thank you guys so much for following along, and the last series did really, really well. I'm so happy that you're learning things, and I'm slowing it down for you so that you're actually seeing what I'm doing instead of just going through it quickly. I know I feel like it's more of an attention span thing, and I know a lot of you are beginners, but then I have some people following me, I think more for inspiration purposes, and they already know how to do everything. So it's hard to kind of make a video to suit both needs. But I did have someone come on and say, she's like, the beauty of YouTube is that you can fast forward or speed up over the parts that, and I'm like, thank you for understanding. You can fast forward and speed up. So you guys, feel free. Play my video faster. If you already know all the things and you just want to see the end result, that's totally fine. I'm not mad about it. I'm just so thankful to have you guys here, and you guys just support me so much in so many ways. So just thank you all the time. Thank you. And yeah, I'll see you next part of this dresser when it's finally finished.